Welcome back to the Audacious Nimby podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Harders. Thank you so much for joining me. We had a little break last week. There's a number of reasons for that. Number one, I'm a lighting designer by trade. And typically the winter months are our slower months, but I'm also in manufacturing. And in manufacturing, we're busy this time of year. So we have to do all our planning to make sure we're fully stocked on inventory going into the entire spring. We also have a lot going on manufacturing and bringing manufacturing to America and to Virginia precisely. And the other thing is this is a time of year where I do a lot of traveling. So I'll be in Carlsbad, California at a lighting convention. I'll be in Orlando. I'll be in Toronto. So I'll be traveling around quite a bit because this is a time of year when most of the lighting groups out there have their conventions. So we're busy this time of year. But the other thing is I wanted to wait to see what the board was going to do last week. I didn't want to jump in. I didn't want to step on anyone's toes. I truly wanted to see what they were going to do. And the reason for this is I mentioned in the last podcast, there's going to be something big potentially happening. I said, I don't like to count my chickens before they hatch. I gave the analogy of being a Bears fan. I took my son to his first Chicago Bears game against the Commanders. We were winning with 5 seconds left. And we all know what happened, the Hail Mary pass. And with 5 seconds left, I said, we haven't won yet. We have a way of snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory. And, the Commanders do the same thing. They're my second favorite team. And, both teams are known for blowing it at the end. And I wanted to make sure before I talked about the ramifications of Margaret Franklin's election, I wanted to make sure it went through. But it's a big deal. If you would have told me 4 years ago when we were knee deep or neck deep in the data center sprawl and Bristow and the digital gateway, that we were going to lose Margaret Franklin, Ann Wheeler, and Pete Canlin, it would have been a time of celebration. Those three were so destructive to our county, in my opinion, because of what they pushed forward. The digital gateway, as I've talked quite a bit about, is a horrendous decision. But there's so much that they push forward, changing the Comp 2040 plan, a number of things that went through during that reign. And to now not have any one of those three is a big deal. So this election was big. It was one of the few times that I looked at Margaret Franklin and I said, I hope she wins. And I know there's a lot of you who felt the same way. And, I think Vern ran a great campaign. It was like a 2-week campaign, but there wasn't much time. It's an uphill battle. You're in Woodbridge. It votes, 70% Democrat. So Vern had a tough row ahead of her. But the idea that we were going to have an open seat is a big deal. And so I want to talk about that. Obviously this podcast we started as Audacious Nimby. It focuses on Prince William County, but also how our decisions affect the other surrounding counties. And many of the other surrounding counties are going through a lot of things that we are. We're just doing it at a greater scale right now. But part of that is land decisions. And a huge part of that is going to be the supervisors and local politics. I'll say over and over again, local politics matters more than the national politics. It's what's going to affect you the most. If you have your home that you've built and raised a family in, and all of a sudden 70 to 88 foot tall data center goes in 150 or 300 feet off your property, and you have to deal with 3 years of construction traffic. And when that finally gets completed, the data centers fire up, and you have the diesel generators, and you have the loud noise that's emitting from the data centers, that's affecting you. It affects your energy bills. It affects your property values. There's so much that can affect. So, these decisions have huge ramifications on your personal life and your daily life. And so so often we pay attention to the national politics when the presidential races, what's going on in Minneapolis or all over the place, but we really need to make certain we're focused on what's happening locally. And that's what this podcast is designed to do, is to bring attention to what's happening locally. So we're not caught off guard and we don't have people saying, when did this get passed? I didn't even know it was going on. So just to raise awareness. I want to tell a story about my sports growing up. So, wrestling was my big sport, but I played football and baseball. And I knew growing up, my dad was 5'8", my mom's 4'11". I knew basketball was not going to be a sport for me. That I just looked at my parents and said, there's no way I'm going to be tall enough to really make a difference there. And football wasn't much different, but I loved football. And I was not great at football. In fact, I would say I was okay. I liked hitting. I played strong safety. My high school was in Illinois. It was similar to a high school like Robinson. We had about 3,700 students. We had a full football team. Our varsity team was made up of like 90, 95 players. So to make the team was a big deal. And actually to get on the field, you had to be pretty good. And I was okay. I was slow, and I was 5'8", 150 pounds. And I played strong safety. I liked being a defensive back. I didn't have great hands, but I could hit. And strong safety or monster linebacker, monster back, it's really for the defensive backs that aren't as fast. And so they're not covering as much, and they run a lot of blitzes. So a good friend of mine was starting, and I would go in and on a lot of blitz packages. But at the time, there were a lot of teams out there that had gone to like newer style offenses, run and shoot, different things like that, where there's a lot of passing, except for one of the teams that was our nemesis. That was Downers Grove North. And they played Smashmouth football. They had a big offensive line, a big quarterback, a fullback, and a huge running back. And they would just run it right up the middle and basically say, try and stop us. And in the game that we were playing, they had their star running back. I think his name was Jeremy Sample. He gets in the game and he's playing. He's just running right through the middle, 6, 8, 10 yards of carry. He was 230, 240 pounds, 6'1" or 2. He ended up being a starting middle linebacker at Notre Dame the next year. And our coach had to come up with a plan to try and stop him. And so he actually said, hey, Harders, get in the field. I want you to blitz up the middle. So I was a monster back. I came running around, went right up the middle, and I meet this monster of a young man right on the line of scrimmage. And I have no idea how it happened, but somehow I was able to get him down. I really don't remember it because I got a concussion doing it, but I was proud to actually lay a hit in that. And that was fun, but it was back in the day where you kind of shook off concussions and moved on with your day. But the point of that was that smash mouth style of football was something that I admired. And in politics, you see that happen too. So we just saw this happen this year. When Bob Weir had passed away, we had an open seat on the board. That gave the board a 4-3 voting majority on data centers, on anything they really wanted to pass. And so there is a group that had been set up by the board, the DCOAG, the Data Center Advisory Group. And this was made up by a group of citizens that had brought in experts, and they were really to provide some advice for the board on how we could make the data centers as livable as possible. After all, we passed more data centers than any other county in the country. A lot of them are being put by homes. We were having noise complaints. We were having a lot of issues. And so they were looking at a number of different issues. One issue that they were looking at was noise ordinance. Another one that I was really interested in is lighting and light pollution. And so they were looking at these different issues. And they took on, for about a 2-year program, the noise ordinance. And this was looking to see how you could determine the noise level of data centers and how you can regulate it. And so they spent over a year trying to figure out, how do we even get to the bottom of this? It's a challenging task to go after because you have so much other ambient noise around you. You have road traffic, you have, just the busyness of life in these areas. And so how do you determine data center noise? Like, what is it that people are complaining about? You heard stories, I believe in Yesley's district, a family came forward and said, we had to move our children down into the basement because their bedroom was so loud with this low hum. And so they brought in experts. They had 2 audiology experts that really studied sound. And they started looking at ways to determine what the data center noise is and what is it that people are complaining about. And just this July, I got a call from a number of people saying, hey, we figured it out. And what they had determined was it wasn't just about decibel levels, but it was about frequency. Low frequency travels further distance. Think of a bass speaker. When it's a low frequency, it travels a further distance. So the frequency mattered. And the other thing was the decibel levels, obviously important. But what they also determined was this expert came in and he tried something different. He raised up the testing equipment about 15 feet into the air. And he said, I got it. I figured it out. And for some reason, that noise level can really be determined, because they wanted to pass a noise ordinance, but they didn't want it to affect other businesses. There was, all these threats that it was going to affect, bars or wineries, anything like that. But it was a steady noise that's run 24/7, that's at a certain decibel level, and that can be heard constantly. And so once they came up with that, they were excited to report back to the board. And this October, the Democrats, well, mostly Democrats, DeShandra didn't join in with them, but the Democrats on the board, the 4 voting majority, said, let's get rid of the DCOAG. It was pretty shocking to a lot of us, but shouldn't be surprising. It was Smashmouth politics. They came in and they said, one meeting at the very end, oh, by the way, let's get rid of the DCOAG. And everyone looked around, fairly surprised, really no notification given. And they said, great, vote on it, 4-3, it's done. So 2.5 years of people's lives, their work, the energy they put into it, all just wiped away in a quick instant. Then 2 weeks later, another supervisor meeting comes up, and Kenny Bodie says, hey, I've been studying this now for about 2 weeks, and talked to some different municipalities, went down to Warrenton, talked to the data centers, and we've come up with our own noise ordinance, and it's good enough. How do you vote? 4-3, passed it through again. So the one thing that really struck fear in the data centers was going to be, is a community going to pass a noise ordinance that's going to be tough to get through? It was going to be the most restrictive noise ordinance recommendation in the country. And after all, we pass more data centers around residential properties. It makes sense that we would also lead the country in protecting the citizens from the noise levels that they're having. But the point of this entire story is they played Smashmouth, and they ran it right down our throats and said, what are you going to do about it? We have the voting majority. So last week we had our supervisor meeting. First time in years that we actually have the majority. We have supervisors that ran on protecting rural areas, redevelopment, reinvestment, and stopping data center sprawl. And so it was interesting just to tune in to see, like, how is this going to unfold? They have the majority. You have Yesli Vega, who's been a strong proponent to say, I don't want data centers outside the overlay district. You had Tom Gordy, who ran against the data center sprawls. You had George Stewart. George Stewart, his entire campaign was, I don't want any more data centers. And then DeShandra has been an advocate. She got sued for a number of things. One thing this year for speaking against improper development, and got sued for as a county official, which is just insanity. That case got dropped, but is another one. So you have the majority, and you potentially have 2 more, because Kenny Bodie has talked quite a bit about, we've had enough data centers. I want to have redevelopment. I want to have reinvestment. I want to stop this sprawl. His voting record hasn't tracked with it yet, but he's been talking about it. And even Andrea Bailey said, I think we've done enough data centers. So, we have the opportunity. And last week I was let down. Nothing really happened. And so that's what my discussion on today is. We have a majority. First time in a long, long time that we're the ones actually having some power and some say in the government to say, what would you like to see happen? We have the votes for the first time. Years ago, we just knew everything was going to go 5-3, 5-3. I mean, we sat in a meeting for 26 hours just to have the meeting end, and instantly one supervisor said to the other, I vote to pass this. The next one says, I second it. Let's have a vote. It's done. And within 5 minutes, without any discussion, that thing goes through quicker than you'd believe. So now the tables have turned. And my question to you is, what would you recommend? If you have a chance to talk to your supervisor, what would you say, hey, what's one thing that we could pass right now that would make an impact? Because that seat's going to get filled. It's going to be a 4-4 tie. But right now is an opportunity. And it'd be a shame to let this opportunity go. I know if I were sitting in that seat, and I'm not, it's George, and George is doing a great job. If I were sitting in that seat, what I would be pushing for. And so I'll share, what I think that they should go for. Obviously, a number of big issues are out there. The Digital Gateway lawsuit is coming up this month in February. I think February 24th is the appeal case. That's a huge deal. It's the largest data center complex ever approved. It's cutting right through the middle of the Gainesville district. and it's very unpopular. And when that thing passed, according to a newspaper article that came out, the data centers knew the risk, and they said they were willing to take on that risk. And here we are as a county, we've just approved now $2 million just on that lawsuit. And you think about where that money could have gone, So what do we go after? Does the board go after to say, that was the previous board that passed this, this wasn't us, so therefore we want to pull out of this lawsuit, and they knew the risk going into it, let them fight their fight. That's one option. Another thing I've heard a lot is like, let's reinstate the DCOAG. And that's another option as well. That was a group of, concerned citizens, very intelligent, that were fighting for the community. I know what I would personally go for, and that would go back to the Comp 2040 plan and looking to put restrictions back into it that we would restrict water and sewer. That would be what I would go for. I think the other ones are great. I think that's something that's really, something to really go after. But my opinion, that's what I would be looking for. That's what I'm hoping we see our supervisors work towards, because you hear the right talking points. You hear the supervisors say, hey, I'd like to have open rural space. I'd like to have open space for people to go to. I'd like to have nice things. I'd like to have a wedding venue. I'd like to have a winery. I'd like to have destinations for people to go to. I've talked to people in Woodbridge, and they say, unfortunately, we've developed everything without much open space. There's one national park, but the county has done very little for development to say, let's preserve some open space so we have it for future generations. Western Prince William County still has open space. It's getting eaten up quickly. There's more assemblages out there that we'll talk about next week. But there is an opportunity to still save some open space and beautiful land and focus on redevelopment and reinvestment. We all want development that's right. We want development that we're investing into areas where there's already population, where there's already infrastructure, where there's already access to traffic and to roads. So why sprawl it? When you sprawl, you get first level development. When you reinvest and build on some density, you get better development, you get better shopping, you get better restaurants, because more people are there. If it's all spread out, you're typically not driving 30, 40 minutes to get to a restaurant. But if it's a short walk from where you live, you're more likely to go there more often. So I would be pushing for that restriction. And that's the oldest restriction in the book. If you want to preserve rural areas, you want to preserve open space, the number one rule in development is restricting sewer lines and water lines, because that allows much greater density. So that's what I would push for. But I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you would advocate to your supervisor that you think might be something that could get passed, and then encourage them. A lot of this comes back, I always like watching some movies, and one of my favorite movies is Braveheart. Every time I see that, if it's a Saturday afternoon and I happen to be flipping through channels and that comes on, I'm always going to watch it. If I see it up somewhere, I'm watching Braveheart. It's one of my favorite movies. And I think the best scene that I've shared with many people in leadership is when William Wallace is walking out of a meeting. So they had a meeting and they said, hey, we just defeated England, and now we got to determine amongst us who's going to be the ruler of Scotland. And they start bickering back and forth, and he just walks away. And then I say, where are you going? He's like, I'm going to go take the fight to England. And they said, that's crazy. You're going to die doing that. And he just walked off. And then the rightful heir to Scotland follows him out. And he says to him, he said, these are lords and landowners. You can't take both these groups on. You'll end up dead. And William Wallace in the movie says, we're all going to end up dead. It's just a question of how and when. And right away, he knew what William Wallace was saying. He said, I'm not a coward. And William Wallace then goes into what it means to be in leadership. And he says, men don't follow titles. Men follow courage. And if you would only lead, they would follow you. And so would I. And I say this to our supervisors. I'm looking for that one to stand up with the courage to say, this is what we want. This is what Prince William County wants. This is what the people want. This may not be where the donations are all going to come pouring in, but this is what the community has said. This is what they've voted for. This is what they've spoken up for. This is what they've shown up for meetings for. And I'm going to stand up. I'm going to stand up against the data centers. I'm going to stand up against the housing developers that want sprawl. And I'm going to put my stake in the ground and say, this is what we want. And my encouragement to each of you is now is our chance for victory. Now is our chance to get something substantial done in the next 2 months. It'd be a shame to just let infighting and bickering and everything else happen and nothing gets done. And then we just sit on 4-4 ties for the next 2 years. But this is the chance to make some inroads and to see great development start happening. So call your supervisor, encourage your supervisors. We have some supervisors that I have shown great promise. You know, George has shown great promise. Deshandra's shown great promise. Tom has shown great promise. Yesley's shown great promise. You know, there are things we've seen them do where they have acted courageously, but this is the time. So encourage them to stand for you, to stand for Prince William County, to make a difference. And this is the time that you need to be engaged. You could wait for 2 months, 3 months, not let your voice be heard. But if you do that, you're going to get the government that's handed to you instead of getting the government that's your representation. So my encouragement, I can't say this enough. We need to fight right now. We need to be ready for the battle. And this is it. This is the time to do it, to be open. Our ideas are better ideas. Our development will be better development. It's harder, but it's better development. The data center sprawl has to stop. We've already more than doubled the amount of data centers that they recommended. We've doubled it. So the highest recommendation, we've doubled it. We now need to look to say, what's going to be best for our community moving forward? What's going to be best for Prince William County? How do we protect our area? How do we get good development? And how do we make a difference in this generation for the next? So thank you, everybody, for tuning into the Audacious Nimby. I'm Patrick Harders. I truly appreciate each one of you. Check us out on YouTube, on X, Facebook, TikTok, our website, audaciousnimby.com. Give us a like, follow us, and stay tuned for more Audacious Nimby. Thank you so much.